It is Friday, February 20th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Avowed episode of LTPS. As per usual, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder, which is the February monthly games are still live on PSN. Make sure you claim those. We also have February PS Plus Extra and Premium. That lineup is now live on PSN as well, and that also means we have some games that will exit the game catalog in about a month's time. So you have about 30 days left to play these games, which are only 6 titles total. That is Circus Electric, Chris Tales, Mobile Suit Gundam Battle Operation Code Fairy, what a ridiculous name for a game, Paradise Killer, Redout 2, and TMNT Shredder's Revenge. So just a little bit over a month left to play those games, or just under a month, I think. Either way, though, let's get into our big news story that dropped yesterday, a huge, shocking news story where PlayStation Studios, we have Sony confirming the closure of Bluepoint Games. That's right, so Bluepoint, operating in Austin, Texas, are shutting down next month. We initially saw this report from Jason Schreier, writing for Bloomberg, and then it was quietly confirmed by SIE. The studio will shut down next month, and roughly 70 staff members will lose their jobs. Now, as a reminder, they shipped Demon's Souls in 2020, then they were acquired in 2021, they worked on God of War Ragnarok for about 2 years, then began working on a God of War live service game, which was canceled in January 2025, and since then, reported by, again, Jason Schreier, the studio spent the last year pitching to SIE. Now, as part of an internal email from the CEO of the studio's business group, Herman Holst, they said, quote, "This decision was not made lightly. Bluepoint is an incredibly talented team, and their technical expertise has delivered exceptional experiences for the PlayStation community. I want to thank everyone at Bluepoint for their creativity, craftsmanship, and commitment to quality. Where possible, we will work to find opportunities for some impacted employees within our global network of studios. While I know this is hard news to hear, I'm confident in the direction we're headed. Creativity, innovation, and building unforgettable experiences for players remain at the heart of PlayStation Studios. We have a robust roadmap for FY26 with much to look forward to in the months ahead." So this is awful news. I can't believe this is happening. Out of all the studios, this is one where we couldn't find some sort of viable path here for Bluepoint. They're an incredibly talented team, and it's just awful to see this happen. Now, having said that, I think a lot of you know it's paramount on LTPS that we always try to set the record straight as far as what really happened, try to understand why it happened, and then, have a conversation from there. Bluepoint, it's weird, right? Because I'm absolutely with everyone as far as anger, bewilderment, how did this even happen? But the anger I find for the vast majority so far, as this news is still relatively fresh at the time of filming, is massively mischaracterized because there is still a fundamental understanding or misunderstanding of how the studios operate within PlayStation Studios. So, again, to make it perfectly clear for people, studios are not assigned games. That's simply not how it works, and it's not how it's worked within PlayStation Studios. I mean, for a lot of developers, this is simply the way of things. You want to make a game, you come up with it, you prototype, you make a vertical slice, you pitch, and you get funding. That's how a lot of studios, well outside of PS Studios, that's how they operate. But within PlayStation Studios in particular, the studios have agency. They have creative agency. Now, the gray area for Bluepoint has always been, certainly with that God of War live service game we discussed back then, it's a matter of, okay, well, they need approval from Sony. What do they pitch? Oh, well, right now, SIE likes live service games. It's a big initiative that the studio, or that the entire organization is heavily investing in. So there's probably a gray area of they felt pressured to pitch something like that, knowing they were going to get approval. My anger is, why are you approving a God of War live service game from a staff that is not to say they couldn't do it, but they probably couldn't. And the reality is they could not because it was canceled. So why are we making a conditional green light on, a team of 70-something staff that, sure, they've worked on God of War Ragnarok for 2 years. They were close to the source material. Maybe that was Bluepoint's line of thinking, but they did pitch it, and they probably felt compelled to pitch it. The other awkward part of this conversation is there's a weird dichotomy of, they were assigned the God of War live service thing, which I would argue is inherently bad if that is what happened. It's not. But they were assigned that. Why were they not instead assigned remakes and remasters like they're so well known for, which I would argue is a bad thing to do because you want the studios to have creative agency, and that is what they had, because this is not speculation on my part. It was very open when they were acquired in 2021 from the studio head Marco Thrush, openly saying, we want to do new things. We're not simply brought up on remakes and remasters. We have 15 years of average developer experience working on original content, and that is our next evolution. That's from the studio head. It seemed very apparent to me back then that the reason why they agreed to be acquired was because they knew they would have financial backing to do bigger and better things. And that's ideally what I thought was going to happen, because they are a very talented creative team. So surely they can evolve beyond remakes and remasters and do something different, maybe a new IP. We're hearing possibly that's what they were attempting to do within the last year from the live service cancellation. And that's what is just, to me, that's what's frustrating about the whole thing, is that why did we approve a God of War live service game, and you're telling me since then there was no viable path for Bluepoint? Surely there must have been something that can salvage, again, a very creative studio that absolutely could deliver something, whether that is them biting their own tongue and saying, okay, we will pitch a remake and remaster, even if that's not something we want to do, but we need to spin up a project in 2-3 years and get revenue back within the studio, because that's the other cutthroat part of maybe why this happened. It's been 6 years since they shipped a game, even though they worked on Ragnarok for about 2-something years. You know, the studios are still evaluated in that sense of how long it's going to be for them to deliver something. So if it's 2026, in the last year, they've been trying to pitch, and then that takes multiple years to see another game come out, and they're located in Austin, Texas, where labor cost is certainly a lot higher. There's a certain logic we have to follow with how cutthroat the number side of it does look like, and so I would think that's maybe what happened. I obviously don't agree with that, though, because it's just such a tragic thing to think that this studio had no path. But that's why you see something like Ben still around, is like, okay, they were able to ship Days Gone Remastered. That's something that bolsters the studio for a little bit. They're also located in Bend, Oregon, so they, conceivably, the labor cost is not nearly as high. It's hard to establish probably a development studio in a location like Bend, Oregon, versus maybe Montreal, where Haven Studios is. There's tax breaks there. So that's why on a studio by studio basis, that's sometimes how these things can be as ugly as they are. But, I mean, this is still a tragic and dark day in PlayStation history, no matter how it happened, because it, quite frankly, shouldn't have. And there's a world where Bluepoint was doing bigger and better things under SIE's leadership, and that simply did not happen. Let's move on to some other not-so-flattering PlayStation Studios news. For example, God of War Sons of Sparta has been out long enough, because it was a shadow drop, so we now have some reviews available as well. And so over on Metacritic, we have about 25-ish reviews, probably more by the time I upload, but the game is averaging out to a 68 on Metacritic, and across about 500 user reviews, it's a 6.5. Now, we did have a Tuesday conversation, some initial impressions. I was about 9 hours in. I'm 15 hours into the game now. I finally have more equipment that's making traversal a bit more conducive to my playstyle, and certainly for combat as well. Because that's the thing, like the main issue I'm having with the game. I find that for Metroidvanias, if the traversal is very snappy, responsive, and it's like fun to move around because you're doing a lot of backtracking, that's what makes a Metroidvania really fun to me. Combat is, of course, very important as well, but it sucks that it takes 15 hours for the traversal to feel a lot more fun, and the combat as well. I'm just still not really clicking with it, but now that I've expanded the spear more and I upgraded the shield so that I can open the parry window a bit more, because I feel like I'm missing parries when I shouldn't be. But again, I really don't know if I'm clicking with the game's intended combat sequences or not. So it might be more on my own skill. But now the game is getting a little bit more fun for me. But I do think that the reviews are pretty much where the game should be. I'm still enjoying it. Like, it's a good game to me, but as far as the two lanes it's trying to be in, of a fantastic Metroidvania and a fantastic God of War game, it's not really excelling in either for me. I don't find that's a massive issue, but it is a bit of a misstep when you consider that it's a PS Studios game. God of War is a very big, important IP for PlayStation, and if I'm SIE, I want to find the very best studio out there to adapt this game and make a 2D God of War Metroidvania, and I just find that it's not really excelling in either element. Now, we do have some big, juicy rumors going on, and a straight-up leak from a very good source for Santa Monica's next game, the Cory Barlog title, and when we could possibly expect this game. So a lot happened here. Let me run you through what did happen. So over on Reset Era on the PS Studios OT, we have Shinobi 602, who's been quite privy to things going on with Santa Monica, responded to some speculation on Cory Barlog's game releasing around 2028, and Shinobi said, quote, "Not that far, barring any delays, of course." We also had Nate the Hate on X, same thing with Shinobi 602, been quite accurate and privy to what's going on in the game's business, and so over on their personal X account, they were discussing in a thread about the recent God of War announcements, and when talking to someone about Cory's game, he said, quote, "Unless a major delay happens, the game will be out in 2027. Also, we had Tom Henderson on the Insider Gaming podcast. He was speculating on Santa Monica's projects, and he made it clear he's not reporting this, so he's simply talking about it, but it's that he's heard the next mainline game could be a younger Kratos with Zeus returning to Greece, which we've heard previously. He said that Kratos would actually be using a scythe alongside the previously rumored Kopish, so the Egyptian sword, if you remember that rumor. But the big leak here is from Christopher Judge himself, the Kratos actor for the Norse games. So recently, the YouTube channel and streamer Fuzz approached his booth at a convention, and they asked him if he's voicing the remakes, and Chris said no, that's going to be TC Carson, but he also said it's going to have a new fighting system, and he said, quote, "And you'll probably hear what we're doing probably late summer," unquote. Shortly after that, the following day, Christopher clarified on their personal X account that they have no involvement in the original games, but they still say they have other projects that they're excited about. More info this summer. So a lot to digest there. I will say any sort of actors or voice talent in games, they can 100% always goof and let us know about things that we shouldn't. I would say that's accurate for the announcement timing. But him speaking on the original trilogy, even if he did work on that, I don't think you can really pay attention to the whole, new fighting system thing, because that's where the speculation is right now on that trilogy and the remakes, is will they do the over-the-shoulder 2018 combat? I would be borderline shocked if that happened, if only because the way games are made. 1 through 3 is a very specific way that those titles were designed. For the isometric viewpoint, the camera angle, how that travels throughout the entire game, specific sight lines, boss battles. There's so many sequences, like everything about that game is tailor-made for the isometric viewpoint and the hack and slash combat. Maybe some refinements, sure, but if you were to do over-the-shoulder combat, like you are completely upending and warping how those games were made, and you're making completely different new games, in my view. I would think these are still going to be by-the-book remakes. It's just a matter of how many liberties they end up taking within the proper scope. Having said that, it does seem more and more likely that we will finally see Cory Barlog's game, which is exciting, especially because I'm going to dial back to my prediction at the start of this year, which I find this game is going to be in-universe God of War. It's going to be lore, canon, and everything, but Kratos is not the protag. We've heard from other sources it's not going to be Atreus, and I would agree with that as well. I think this is going to be some sort of in-universe God of War game, but it's not Kratos, it's not Atreus, and we will see, possibly later this summer, if that does end up happening, which would be exciting. And then for Tom Henderson's comments, I mean, it's hard to really parse out where he's hearing that from, where it's going, and I think he's making the right call by not reporting on that properly, because it sounds like he's not even fully confident as far as what that means or where the direction of the series is going. I think the next proper mainline entry is actually very far away, based on most of the studio working on Cory Barlog's game. As that starts to wind down, potentially shipping in 2027, you've got people funneling into the remake trilogy. I'm not sure if that's going to be entirely in-house or if that's going to be a co-development thing or if they're going to do a lot of outsourcing, but you would think people will funnel into that. And then another small core group within Santa Monica will start working on the next mainline entry, and maybe that's what they're considering or looking to do. With that in mind, though, enough speculation. That's what happened with the Cory Barlog rumor. Now, dialing back to the God of War Remake trilogy discussion, there's been one other conversation that really blew up this past week, and that is the sex minigames in 1 through 3. Are those going to stay in or not? which initially I was surprised by how big of a conversation this turned into, although it does make sense. I mean, I think anybody should be able to confront the idea of they were a bit more juvenile, very, very early 2000s men's locker room humor in a way. I mean, I find they're not completely inoffensive. They didn't overstep their boundary per se, but contextually they are much more juvenile than the sexual themes and violent nature of what Sony does nowadays for their games. Because that's, I guess, where I initially thought. It's like, well, SIE does these things for their games all the time, just that, okay, contextually they might be a bit different compared to how God of War was doing it in 1 and 2, which it's an optional little thing you do for red orbs, and that's essentially it. And then 3, they actually do tie it a little bit closer into the story, so it is like a much bit, I don't want to say super huge sequence. Again, it kind of comes and goes. You don't see anything outside of, you do see breasts, but I mean, that's the thing. Outside of maybe trying to avoid a Streisand effect, I think the best thing for SIE to do is not take the scenes out, because that's the issue. Like, SIE is acutely aware of what this will mean if they do take them out, or even so much as acknowledge it by putting up maybe a screen before you start the scene, or loading up a save file and letting players have the agency of saying no to it or something, because they were already optional in the game as is. I mean, realistically, the option is always, having the option is the best part, so maybe it could be something like that as a compromise, and based on where they plan globally shipping the game, which should be everywhere, certain territories might be a bit more stringent on that, as we saw with Dispatch on Switch 2. So there's things that they might have to get around either way. It depends on how they choose to do it. But my initial thought was like, I don't see why they would be removed. It feels like some were immediately like, no way they're staying in. It's like, yeah, I mean, they don't really hold up, I think, all that well, but otherwise, it didn't feel like they were overstepping their line here to remake those portions for the modern releases as well. But, I mean, it's all speculation. I could be dead wrong on this. We'll see. We don't have the answer, and we probably won't have the answer for a very long time. Let's get into some hardware news, and we're hearing more and more that for PlayStation 6 and the AI demand and the RAM prices, this is heavily weighing on Sony's decision for the release timing of this console. So we have a new report from Bloomberg by Debbie Wu, Takashi Mochizuki, and Yulim Lee, which goes over the AI demand and what that's doing to the technology and electronic companies sector. And so, touching on game consoles, they do echo the report from Insider Gaming about a possible delay that Sony is considering for PS6. So this report says that Sony is thinking about pushing it back to 2028 or even 2029, according to people familiar with the company's thinking. Quote, "That would be a major upset to a carefully orchestrated strategy to sustain user engagement between hardware generations. Close rival Nintendo Co., which contributed to the surplus demand in 2025 after its new Switch 2 console drove storage card purchases, is also contemplating raising the price of that device in 2026, people familiar with its plans said. Sony and Nintendo representatives did not respond to request for comment." So it's the same thing that we keep hearing. We're here to discuss game consoles, obviously, but it cannot be undermined just how much of a problem this is going to be for the entire electronics segment and any product out there that uses very basic, crucial components of memory and storage. It is going to be a massive issue, and it does completely upend a plan that PlayStation had, and that everything is lined up here for building an SoC, launching the console, sending out dev kits, having a timeline for studios and partner studios to have these dev kits make games, make a library for this new console, and it's very hard to pump the brakes on that, as we discussed 2-3-ish weeks ago. And my line of thinking is still similar in that, like, I'm fine with another year, possibly 2, but I do not want to wait up to the 2030s for PlayStation 6. I feel like I'm in the minority here saying that, especially because it's like you don't have to buy a PS6 if it comes out in 27, 28, or 29. But I'm certainly more traditional, old-fashioned. I like new console launches. I still get, for the most part, very excited when they come out. It's still a cool, fun, exciting time for me. But 2030, like at that point, anything beyond, I would prefer a new SoC because, well, then the console is going to be even more outdated at that point, right? I mean, consoles are always sort of locked down and closed boxes for a set number of years. So to sit on this SoC for too long, at that point, we're already demanding these bigger visual leaps, which simply just can't happen like they used to. So Sony's in a very awkward spot, and I don't know what they do at this point. it is just looking more and more likely that, yeah, PlayStation 6 might very well be a 2028 machine, maybe 29, possibly longer, and I think that would suck. Now, in other PlayStation 6 rumor news, speaking on the SoC itself, we are hearing that the console might not be full RDNA 5. It's a whole weird thing going on here between a number of the chip leakers that we've been discussing for quite a while. So over on NeoGAF, Kepler L2 was responding to somebody about PS5's GPU makeup and how it's RDNA 1 plus RT hardware, and they briefly closed the post out by saying PS6 isn't full RDNA 5. This then turned into a bit of a spat on X, where Moore's Law is dead. Then Tom Henderson was reporting on the story, and then Kepler responded to that, clarifying that PS6 is RDNA 5, as in it's more RDNA 5 than PS5 was to RDNA 2. So, bit of a argument going on there, but I mean, that was the annoying thing about PlayStation 5 building up to that console launching, is it RDNA 1 or 1.5 or 2, and I don't know, I find it's really a whole splitting hairs thing. I think it's really important to not undermine Sony's very close involvement with AMD in building out this microarchitecture and fleshing it out. And Sony as a customer and AMD as the vendor, Sony can have that very deliberate choice of specifically picking out certain GPU features on that product roadmap that AMD and now Sony themselves are closely building out, and that's why you get really cool console-like optimizations. I think even Kepler's underselling what PlayStation 5 was able to accomplish. It just becomes a really big splitting hairs thing and sort of a wiener measuring contest on if the console's full RDNA this or that. It's like, at the end of the day, if it's probably going to produce some very visually clean-looking games. But to my point from the last story, I just don't want to wait too long for that, because at that point, conceivably, I would just want it to make a bigger visual leap based on that AMD product roadmap. Let's move on to some third-party news stories, beginning with Konami and Metal Gear Solid 4 and Peace Walker, where they delisted these games on the PlayStation Store on PS3. Really puzzling. Who knows why? I mean, clearly it was in alignment with the announcement for the MGS Volume 2 collection, but as of right now, on the PS Store and PS3, now you can no longer buy MGS4 or Peace Walker's PSP and PS3 versions. I really can't wrap my head around why. I mean, there couldn't be licensing issues because it was very clearly timed with the Volume 2 collection, and hardly anybody is probably transacting those games on PS3 anyway, so it's very bizarre how some publishers do this. Maybe it is a licensing thing based on the new license that they have, and that stipulates any sort of remaining versions that are listed on PSN. I have no idea, but there is that. We also actually heard in this new interview on GameSpark from the creative producer Yuji Korikato that the collaborative elements in MGS4 and Peace Walker are still going to be there, or at least some are. So if you remember things like the Altair costume or the Apple iPod showing up in the game, those are still going to show up probably. Certainly the costume. Also confirmed for the online modes, MGO2 from MGS4 not coming back, but Peace Walker's co-op and online versus mode, that is going to be there as well. So handful of things that we learned for those two games, but just a very weird thing with the delisting. It's always really annoying when that happens. We actually also saw that for the Rayman 30th Anniversary Edition that came out because, ironically, the game is still listed on PSN, the PS1 Classics, I think, on the EU store, and I think North America as well. I'm not 100% certain, but the soundtrack for that game has a new reimagined version, and so a lot of diehard Rayman fans noticed that immediately when playing that. So at the time of filming, the old PS1 classics are still available, but they did use a new soundtrack. I guess they're going to explore possibly using the old one. Sometimes, as we've seen with older games, licensing comes in all different shapes and sizes. It could be that specific track itself when they made it at the time. If they outsourced it, I don't know, I'm not a huge Rayman person, but whatever the circumstance is, that could have led to the new updated version. Moving on to Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, where we're getting some encouraging news about possibly hearing more about the game later this year, and also addressing some concerns with the new multi-platform approach. because some people are now curious with the series going to Switch 2 and Series S day and date. That's the expectation, at least, is that maybe the games will have the visual fidelity pulled down. But speaking with Automaton, the director Naoki Hamaguchi explained that Part 3 will not be downgraded. He says that the development structure simply doesn't work that way to begin with, and so when they spec the game out and build it on PC, they build it to the highest fidelity possible, and then porting to consoles, they try to dial in and reduce or adjust assets appropriately within that environment's GPU, CPU, memory, etc. And so he said that the team right now is entering the final phase to push for the game, and so as far as release timing, they're not saying anything there, but he did say that it won't be too long before they're able to share some kind of update with everyone, which, again, the ongoing rumor is that this summer we might see something for Part 3. So nice to have him acknowledge that games nowadays do tend to be very scalable. Rebirth was a very ambitious game. I know a lot of people tend to spend time talking about the optimization for the game itself and how it can be somewhat CPU bound, and that's more on Square and their development team. But either way, games nowadays are very scalable. It really does fall simply on optimizations and how close the team is paying attention to those certain parameters as they're making these games out. But I would think that, it's going to be this summer where we might see Part 3, and that's why I will be closing up my Rebirth playthrough very soon. Next up, there's been more and more going on with Crimson Desert as it builds up to its launch next month, and this time it's primarily about the genre that it's in, which this has been going on for a while, but Pearl Abyss will not call this game an RPG, so that's been a point of contention, is that a lot of people would look at this game and think that it is one, but Pearl Abyss PR, for years even, has been telling the press that it should be considered an open-world action-adventure game. And that's namely because the game does not have XP or leveling up, and there isn't player agency in terms of decision-making that would have consequences and things like that. However, the game itself does still have a skill tree, equipment, loot, side quests, a crafting system, a lot of things you typically would find in this genre, so that's just been a really big talking point lately as the game is about to come out, is that what even is this game? Because there's still some skepticism on when this thing comes out. Is it actually very shallow? Is it going to be engaging with just how much that they're showing off and how much you can do in this game? And I don't know. It's with the genre itself. I mean, this might also be a splitting hairs thing. I'm not too bothered by what you would call it, if you'd call it an RPG or not. I mean, definitely it is an action-adventure game with RPG elements. I think that is perhaps the safest way to assess the game, and that's very similar to other action-adventure games that very much have that. Whether it is a more traditional leveling system or a skill tree or not, a lot of these games do tend to have RPG elements, light elements, so I don't know. It falls on the game itself to be a fun game to begin with, and that's still the more pertinent question I find. Okay, moving on to some Todd Howard and Bethesda news. We had this recent interview on Kinda Funny where Todd Howard was speaking with them, and he did provide a small update for Starfield, this upcoming update that, well, people have been expecting for a while, but he did set some expectations. Quote, "We're moving into a phase where we're ready to talk about Starfield. We've been doing a lot of work we like a lot. It's not Starfield 2.0. I've seen a lot of people talk about that. So for expectation setting, if you already love Starfield, I think you're going to love this. It's updates and things which change the game, not in an isolated way, but in a meta way. But if Starfield's something you didn't connect with or found boring, then I don't think this is going to change that." I actually really love that earnest honesty on, hey, just so you know, I'm seeing a lot of people call this Starfield 2.0, which is basically how I keep describing it, because I think everyone expects that this is going to be a more substantial update, but he's just airing out immediately. If you did not care for this game, this likely is not going to change that. I gotta really respect that open and honest language of, don't expect this to completely change this experience for you, which also certainly sets the expectation of it's probably not going to reduce the friction and pain points that Starfield has been known for, which, if anything, is also a bit of a shame, especially since we're expecting the PlayStation 5 version of this game, so conceivably by the time it comes to PS5, you might be getting a game that's a lot more refined. And that might be true if Starfield is a game that, on a baseline level, you would end up enjoying anyway. Now, as for Elder Scrolls 6, we also have an update from, again, Todd Howard in the same interview with Kinda Funny. And so with Elder Scrolls 6, he does say they're happy with the current progress and how the game is coming together. It is still going to be a while, but they're able to play it right now, and they're passing a big milestone. And so the studio is working on it, the entire team. And he also confirmed that their Creation Engine 2 is now updated to version 3, which is powering the game and beyond. Which there has been a lot of concerns for the Creation Engine. They've been using it for a very long time. And this is the thing about proprietary in-house engines. There's so much upside to crafting the experience you want to make, but there is this manual upkeep over time to add new features and things that you want to accomplish whatever you want to do in the next game you're building. And there's still some pain points with Starfield itself for a lot of the loading screens and the fundamental basis of how that game was made. I'm not sure if version 3 is really going to address those concerns. I mean, I think it's a very layered conversation when you consider an in-house proprietary engine and what it can and cannot do really well. It's not going to be a be-all, end-all answer, but it remains to be seen for a long time if the next entry in the Elder Scrolls franchise is going to really blow people away and if the engine is going to be the one to blame or not. Moving on to another not-so-good update for Highguard and developer Wildlight Entertainment. So right now the official website is down, and that does not really breathe in any sort of confidence for the game and the position that it's in. We did see on the official Discord that one of the remaining developers explained that right now the page needs to be moved over and simplified, and that's a really low priority right now, especially with the damage already being done, with it being disclosed that, hey, the website is down. And we also are now hearing from Stephen Totillo's newsletter GameFile that Tencent was a lead financial backer for Wildlight Entertainment. Of course, neither company disclosed this since the game was announced, but that's been a contentious news story that has come to light as well, with Tencent being, again, a lead financial backer for this game. And it's a little weird as to why that's so contentious. I mean, of course, there's been a lot of back and forth from some of the team members that were at the studio at the time, how, hey, we're independent, we're making this really big, encouraging new thing, and we didn't really get our shot or something to that effect, which we now know there was like 1.5 million something players in January when the game came out, which you can safely say that is not a Concord scenario. Concord, we know, nobody played it and bought it. That game never had a chance. Whereas this game actually did. It got a substantial amount of players, and that is nearly 1.5 million something people, possibly more, that tried it and said, this is not for me, which is what's so tough about making live service games in today's environment. Now, having said that, I'm not shocked, but I'm very surprised by why this is such a big issue when all independent studios, if they don't have a publisher, that's why they're still considered independent. But where do you think that money comes from when a brand new studio gets spun up and they release a game without a publisher? Somebody still backed that studio, and so developers oftentimes always go through funding rounds. And Tencent's a very big name in the space. So whether it's the PIF or Tencent or other VCs and angel investors that you've probably never heard of, the money does come from somewhere. And sometimes they have a lot of influence in the direction of that studio, other times not so much, and they understand that the team needs creative autonomy to end up putting out the product that they do want to make. But they're not getting publishers. When you enter into a publishing agreement, that really warps the perception of how the game ends up getting made and also distributed, so it's a very different climate in that sense. So I don't know if this is one of those isolated things where people are realizing like, oh, this one game was funded by Tencent and that now it looks a certain way, when conceivably a lot of other games are made in the same way, even if they are independent at the time. And I don't know, it's just like, I think that's people learning how the games business works, and Highguard is just unfortunately a sort of scapegoat in people learning that that's how a lot of this stuff does end up working. I'm not sure it really changes much of anything when you know that Tencent funds a lot of games. This game actually had a chance at finding an audience, and they were not able to accomplish that. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, And for this week, we have a game giveaway, Vampire Therapist, which launched on PS4, PS5 this past week. We have 10 codes to give away, courtesy of Ultimate Games SA. This title is BAFTA nominated. It's a very interesting take on visual novel storytelling combined with mental health education. So if you would like to win, then follow the link down below or scan the QR code and enter the Gleam giveaway. And up to 10 people can win because we have North America and EU codes, but it doesn't matter. Anybody can enter and win. Just use the appropriate PSN ID from that store, redeem, and you can still play the game. So we are trying to give away 10 copies of Vampire Therapist. Those are some of the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Tuesday conversation was God of War Sons of Sparta, some initial impressions, the problems that game has, still a good game, but also it's more on principle of I would love for SIE to do more of these games, and so that was our conversation. I'm glad a lot of you really enjoyed us doing more of a targeted conversation around a recent game launch. I know I should probably start doing more of those, obviously. We spend so much time on more of the businessy side of PlayStation and things like that, but it's always refreshing to talk about games as well, so we'll probably do more of that. And then coming up, probably another video on Tuesday as per usual, and that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.